Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Pick and Mix podcast with Leadership Launchpads. And today we have a very special guest, Julie Keys from the Educational Coach, who I was joking about offline just before I came on. I've only met once, and I was completely blown away and in the most professional way, infatuated when I came away from that first meeting. I was like, I need to work with this lady. I need to get her on the podcast. And so, yeah, I'm excited to hear more of her story, and I'm sure everybody else is. So I guess we'll start off with, Julie, tell us who you are and what you do.
Well, that is such a lovely introduction, Chris. I mean, honestly, and and likewise. I mean, I sent you a message straight after that, and I felt like we'd kind of known each other for such a long time.
Yeah.
I felt very comfortable messaging you, probably more comfortable than I should. And as I was reading through your leadership launchpads, at every moment that I was looking at a new one, I was like, "Wow, this
Yeah.
is so good." Thank you. I've forgotten what the question was. Who am I?
Who are you? What do you do?
Who am I? What do I do? Well, I'm Julie, Julie Keys, and as you mentioned, the organisation that I run is called the Educational Coach. So I work with schools who are interested in coaching broadly. And I don't know, what do you want to know? All the nitty gritty?
Well, let's talk about. So, where are you based? That's exciting.
Oh, good. Yeah. Okay. Good question. I have just moved. I say just moved. We're coming to the end of our first year in Dubai. And it's a new country for me. It's a new country for our family. We've had a journey to like explore it, engage with it, and we're all really happy. I think I'm speaking for my family. But prior to that, we were living in Cornwall in the UK, and before then, we were teaching internationally in Malaysia. So we're kind of where we're from is kind of a difficult thing to pin down, I think,
Yeah.
but currently residing in Dubai. Um, and my background, as well as my husband's background, it's how we met, was teaching. So hence why I'm talking to you. But yeah, our whole lives have just been education. I'm one of those people that, really left university and went straight into going back into schools, and then have stayed there up until the last few years where I've been doing this, which is still in schools. And as my husband describes, he doesn't really know how to describe my job to people, so he says I'm a teacher. I
Oh, I
teach.
like that. Yeah. And
So
do the kids say that? My mummy teaches the teachers.
yeah, and then when I say that to other people, they're like, "What does that mean?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "I don't." Yeah, exactly what they've just said. Really, I'm a teacher.
I love that.
So yeah.
And what was your subject? Was it primary or secondary or?
Secondary. I'm a secondary trained geographer.
Oh,
Loved my subject, I have to
yeah.
say. Like, did it because I wanted, I really, really wanted people's world to be opened, and like that
Right.
sounds so cliched, doesn't
Yeah.
it?
Well.
Like that's all we want as teachers is to kind of open up the doors for opportunity and possibility and all of that. But geography for me was like exactly that. Like it was kind of in my blood already, and we might talk about my background and my family and stuff, but um like I wanted other people to know that there's this huge world out there,
Yeah.
and we're all connected to it somehow, and geography just felt like the connecting subject to lots of other things. It kind of helped me make sense of the world,
I
basically.
love that. I've always wondered. I mean, I don't know why I haven't asked some of the geographers I know, but is there any competitiveness between human geographers and physical geographers? If,
Oh,
which camp are
that
you
is a
in?
knotty question, isn't it? I don't. Do you know what? Is there a competitiveness? I don't think so. That said, I think that there was potentially a little bit of. I don't know whether this is reflected on other geographers. They can feed in. There was definitely when I was at university a kind of feeling like if you did a human geography degree, you would end up with a BA, and if you did a physical geography degree, you'd get a BSc.
Right, science. Yeah.
And so there was like this feeling that somehow, still back in the day, when the sciences were proper and the arts weren't really kind of thing. And so my dad very heavily encouraged me to do more science-based modules, more physical geography-based modules, so
Right.
that I would get a BSc, so that I could be taken seriously.
Very good.
Um, Even though I loved human geography, that
Mm.
actually is probably, based on what I do now, my interest, intrigue in humans and sociology, anthropology, that kind of thing was probably much more my bent. But I was knee deep in rivers, measuring the rate of flow
Yeah, I
in a
love
river.
that. Yeah, I love that. Well, let's get stuck into the podcast because I can't wait to hear all these the answer to all these questions.
Neither can I, Chris. What
We
I
have
was saying,
some fun in terms of the prep. Some of this stuff is coming straight, zero filter from
there we
Julie.
go. Zero filter.
Well, this could be where we start talking about what you said, your family, because the first Fast Friends question you chose was if you could change anything about the way you were raised, what would it be? So, wow. You can't remember why you chose that. So let's go.
Each one of these questions is a massive surprise to me,
love it.
in spite of choosing them. And I shared with you that I've been suffering with laryngitis for like a month and a half, and you can still hear it in my voice. Sorry, podcast listeners. Going to have to put up with a kind of husky, squeaky voice. And I think I must have been on quite a lot of medication when I chose these, because now I'm thinking, why? But there are loads of things I would have changed about the way I was raised. Not necessarily negative, I suppose, but there are elements of that I suppose if I could go back and like completely redo it, then I would.
Yeah.
Something that's kind of high level that is like a wish is that I wish I was multilingual.
Okay.
I come from a mixed background. My mum is from Indonesia. My dad is British. They met in Germany. They are both fluent German and French speakers. My mum speaks to me in her fourth language. Um, they have this huge ability and capacity to learn languages to a really high level. And my dad has gone on to learn Russian, and now he's learning Arabic because we're in the Middle East. And they like a challenge linguistically. And I just feel really aggrieved that that
Yeah.
wasn't passed on, given that it was the opportunity. I don't speak Indonesian particularly well. I can understand it, but I don't speak it fluently. I don't speak any German at all, in spite of being born there. And I only speak, school-based French. I'm probably better at Spanish because I learned that at school to a higher level. But yeah, that's a big regret.
Yeah, I love that. And do you wish that your parents had almost forced you into that?
Yeah, I feel like I learned Indonesian by osmosis. Like there were Indonesian people around in our household and like my family friends. So I would hear it and I would understand it. And we spent a lot of time in Indonesia. So that kind of happened, but not ever formally. I just kind of annoyed that they both had the opportunity at home. They could have just said, right, we're just going to speak in French at home, or we're just going to speak in German at home. And then I would have learned it.
Wish you would.
Selfishly, they spoke to me in English.
But it's funny. I mean, there's a bit of a parallel to me because I had really, really still have, they're still alive, really loving parents, but they were very passive. It was almost like, as long as you're happy, you just crack on. And of course, if I was answering the same question, I think I would have liked to have been pushed a little bit more. Because I don't think I was well within my comfort zone for most of my childhood. And that has left me void of some of the things I could do with now.
Well, actually, that's sort of in a way the kind of opposite, apart from the multilingualism, which was an untapped opportunity on their part.
Right.
The other thing I potentially might have changed about the way I was raised was that both my parents are like highly intelligent, highly ambitious people, and as children of them, I was speaking for my siblings as well here, but that's not really fair because they should be able to speak for themselves.
Wow.
I feel like there was a definite kind of relentless focus on continuously improving to be the best person you could be, and that comes from, it's actually very timely. This is a bit of an interesting interlude. Can I just go and get something? It's
Yeah, come on, get it.
It's relevant, I promise.
I'll sing a little song or something, like little lift music.
A little, do a little interlude. So an interesting piece of information about my parents, or about my dad specifically, is that his role, although for a very long time we thought he was a government spy, for his official role was that he was essentially, I don't know how to say this without it sounding a bit pompous, him and a gentleman from Japan started a company and in the 80s, that essentially revolutionized the kind of manufacturing industry. And it's this concept.
Oh, yes. I am familiar with that.
There we go. And maybe some of your podcast listeners, Kaizen, I'm holding a book up for those of you who are listening, just listening. I'm holding a book up called Kaizen. The man that wrote this book is called Masaki Imai, and the man that co-founded the company Kaizen with him is my father. And the philosophy
Oh, my
behind Kaizen is continuous improvement. And that almost is the mantra of our family. And while that,
yeah.
I love that and I live by that, it can be quite hard as a kind of relentless focus when you're a child. That's like, and how could you do it better? And how could you be more efficient around that
Yeah.
kind of feeling? So yeah, so that, there you go. There's a little bit of
I
interest.
love that. And all I can start thinking now is I need Julie's dad on this podcast. I am getting him on here before the end of the year.
Okay.
Absolutely. Okay.
Okay. Well, he's
Wow.
very different. He's very serious. He's very
Oh, I would
serious.
love that. I can put a tie on or something.
Fine. Okay.
Right then. Well, let's just to keep you feeling uncomfortable, we're gonna go to your first ignition point, which for new listeners, the idea is that we ask leaders a little bit about their lives and to highlight kind of two what we call ignition points or activities or experiences that had a profound impact on them. And the first one that Julie's chose is a lunch when you were 16. So
I know.
tell us
Gosh, it
about what happened there.
sounds mysterious. And I wonder whether who knows how the way the universe works, this podcast might find its way back to the person that I had lunch with.
Okay.
It was important an ignition point for two reasons. To follow on from what I was just speaking about with my dad, the reason I was having lunch with this person was because during the period of time when I was growing up, sort of probably from the age of 10 to 16, my dad got very heavily into neuro-linguistic programming. This was his thing, or one of his many things. But when he gets into something, he's all in. And he, for those of you who don't know, neuro-linguistic programming is kind of a focus on the language that we use and the impact that it can have. And actually now has been quite popularized in general kind of coaching terminology and the way that we speak with each other. Certainly leadership, it kind of feeds into leadership as well. And he was trained by like the person that started it. Anyway, he decided that it was so important that I should also be trained in NLP. And so as a 16-year-old, I was sent off to central London on a NLP course that got me to the level of NLP practitioner, with a bunch of, I thought they were old people. They were 40.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, a bunch of 40-year-olds are now thinking, oh no, they're not old. They were really young, quite young people. Anyway, a bunch of kind of corporate people who were on this course because maybe they were in sales. It was definitely a sales sort of thing. And I was the youngest person there by far, obviously. Like, I think they thought I'd stumbled into the wrong room.
Yeah, the wrong place.
And one of the participants, one of my co-participants, kind of took pity on me, I think, a little bit, and said, "Listen, let me take you out for lunch and let's have a chat," because I look like a rabbit in the headlights.
Yeah, of course.
And his kindness was so, it meant a lot. I was familiar with London, and that I grew up in London, so it wasn't that. It was just that I was very much a fish out of water. And back to my previous, the parenting style was get comfortable with being uncomfortable fast, because that's how you're going to grow. And this gentleman took me out for lunch, and then he said to me at the end of lunch, make sure you repay this favor with somebody in the future.
That's nice.
And that, like, I still remember that, and I still think about that when I walk into rooms and I think, there's someone here that feels really, really uncomfortable. I'm going to go and make sure I spend time with them so that they don't feel like they're a fish out of water, or any other analogy you want to throw in there.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so yeah, that definitely was a turning point, which was, and that kind of has probably charted a lot of the course of what I do, which is help, like be the helper, be the person that's going to be the person for somebody else, their cheerleader, their confidant, whatever it might be, whatever they need. Try and be that person if you can.
yeah. Well, there's fascinating. There's so much again stuff to unpick in that, but there's something in there around leadership as a service. I think for leaders
Yeah, nice.
listening to this, if you haven't yet made that transition in your mind to your job is to serve others,
Mm.
then make that shift as quick as you can, because most the rest of us, and anyone who's read in most of the recent leadership literature, has bought into this idea that it's not a title, it's not a status thing, it's a responsibility. And for me, the biggest joy comes from supporting others and serving others. And like you said, if you can go into a room or go to work every day thinking, who can I help, who can I serve, who can I pay it forward to, you're gonna have a pretty successful, nice life.
Hopefully, and also just to talk about that, I'm reflecting now. I've had a recent coach supervision session, which is such an important part of coaching practice, and I brought a challenge to that table, essentially saying how much of what I do should be a reflection of who I am as a coach versus what my coachee needs.
Yeah.
And my supervisor said, "We're here to serve." Like, so what that person needs should guide your input, essentially, not what you want to put in there. And that's essentially the role of a coach. And it was just good to have that kind of reaffirmed, essentially, which is we're here to serve.
Well, we always, I always like thinking about the key takeaways that and trying to kind of shine a spotlight on those as we go through the podcast, so people can really take those. And that idea of we're here to serve is, a soundbite that I think will resonate. That's great. Well, let's get stuck into the first kind of launch pad. So as normal,
Oh, yeah.
I'll flash up the image. I'll talk the audience through what I was thinking when I made it, and then you can tell us a bit about when you were flicking through the book, it kind of resonated with you. So
By
the
the
launch pad.
way, Chris, this is the book that you put together. I mean, I know that everybody finds it super useful, but like it's just so great. I mean, it's so good. It's so good.
Well, I mean, I'm chuffed,
Yeah.
and again, I struggle with I don't know what I struggle to accept praise, or again, this is why I'll probably resonate with your dad, really, because it's never good enough for me. I'm never satisfied, and that's not healthy, and it doesn't help my mental health. But I appreciate it, and I have got to remember to take the praise and to say,
Yeah,
yeah, thank
it's
you.
great.
Yeah. Well, this one was interesting because I'd never heard of this thing called triple loop learning. And that's
Okay.
really why the launch pads get created, is that I'll hear a term that I didn't know. I'll go and do a quick bit of research on it. And if I feel like it resonates, I want to know more and more and more. But then
Mm.
I get into the weeds of it and think, oh my God, now I'm confused. So then I create the launch pad, which then helps me not be confused and then potentially create something. So this was this idea that kind of, let me just try and get this thing working, that yeah, we can increase the depth of our insights, and obviously therefore our learning, by examining the results, there's a spelling mistake there, in progressively deeper loops. And so when I started looking at this, I was kind of like, oh, that's interesting. And visually I thought, right, if we put kind of learning and depth of insight on a graph, I suppose you'd say, the first idea is that if something's happened, so we'll call that results, the depth at which you examine that has an impact on the learning. And so this idea of single loop learning, and apologies for those that are experts in this, but as the launch pads suggest, this is just a starting point. This idea that, at single loop, something's happened, and then you are looking at what caused it to try and understand. And all you do is you just correct the thing that caused it. Fine. Then there's this idea of double loop. So you then go back to the same problem and think, okay, that's what caused it. But maybe, and they use this idea of frame, But effectively what it means is kind of you're then questioning why it occurred. So not just what caused it, it's why did that cause it. So again, you're taking your thinking to a deeper level. And then the idea is that there's another one, this triple loop, where you go round again, you go even deeper into the problem to start thinking about, are there any links, like more widely, to culture, values, beliefs? So there's almost this idea that we're trying to fix a problem, but potentially a single loop is quite superficial in terms of its fix. And then you get deeper and deeper until you're suddenly realizing that the problem occurred because of some fundamental issue with your core beliefs or values, maybe yourself or an organization. And so I think the idea is that we should push ourselves where time allows to, go into more loops of learning. But I mean, as we say it, I can see definitely the parallels with coaching, but why did it resonate with you?
Well, on two levels. I mean, not to this definitely is not a podcast about my dad, but that until I see things like this, I don't realize how deeply ingrained some of the stuff that he used to kind of speak to me about, or I'd hear him speaking about, resonates. And to be clear, as I said, the concept of Kaizen comes from manufacturing and trying to create lean and efficient processes. And this this kind of loop would be, if you were to put it into the context of, let's just imagine we were in a car factory and we were trying to make the system more efficient. We would, of course, first of all look at, like, initially everybody's looking at, there's an issue, and we're going to look at the action that created that issue, and then we're going to broaden it out. And the idea of Kaizen is exactly that. Like, we have to pull all the way back to understand, like, the systems under which you operate and the principles on which you operate that have resulted in these actions even coming about. So it's not about this particular bit of machinery or this particular step on the production line. It's actually about how you set up the whole factory, or where the waste part. I hope my dad's not listening to this, because I am absolutely butchering this concept, and anybody who knows this better than I will also say, what is she talking about? But when I take that and I just put it into the work that I do, and to be clear, lots of his work was around leadership and management and how organizations run and function. Um, that stuff is exactly what happens in a coaching process, which is, when we think about, and I often reference Michael Bungay Stainer and the coaching habits and what the real challenge is. Often when we ask people in the initial stages of coaching, what would you like to talk about, or what's front of mind, the first thing that they will talk about will be that first step, that action, and this has been the result. And your role as a coach is to pull them all the way back, and actually I try and flip it. So when I'm building a relationship with somebody, and obviously rapport comes into that, and trust, and vulnerability and openness, I try and go all the way back to that context as fast as we can, so that I get to understand who you are as a person, because that will tell me more about what happened in that very sharp point of, and then I did this thing and I got this result, than it will be if I focus on this tiny little bit here. And we could fix it, but we might not sustainably fix
Yeah,
it for the future, because
yeah, yeah.
you'll go back to your patterns of what you believe and what motivates you and what you value, and that's more important to kind of have alignment there. So I think that's why I picked it out, because that last bit where it said core values and beliefs, like, that's a lot of the area that we work with in coaching. And it might end up as a result in a shift in classroom pedagogy, but we're starting with, who are you, and who are you as a professional and a person,
Yeah.
because it's all going to inform it.
Brilliant. And again, I think, your experiences in coaching are similar to mine in that, definitely for me, my experience is that the problem people initially present is very rarely the actual problem,
Yeah.
and then you have those awkward ones. And I've had lots of these where they, the leader has presented the reason for the problem. And then after some more kind of reflection, it ends up that they're the problem, That's really awkward. Um, and I've had a personal one recently. I did some. I've been having some counselling, which I don't know if I've mentioned on another podcast, but counselling to understand why I'm so restless all the time and all this sort of stuff. And again, awkwardly, I was presenting my role as, or my life as, the reason why I'm restless. And after some sessions, it basically was, yeah, it's not your job or your life. It's you. I was like, oh. But I actually felt quite empowered by that, because I had
Yeah.
control over that. And but anyway, as much as it's not a podcast about your dad, it's not a podcast about me either. So let's keep going. So let's get a bit stuck into your next fast friends question, which it will be a theme of today's, that this puts you on the spot. We can't see any flushing in your face around embarrassment. And I did
That's
notice today
sharing a lot of
you're on brand with the educational coach. Is that
always be on brand, Chris. Always.
always? Well, I don't know what brand I've got. So your question was, if a crystal ball could tell you the truth about yourself, your life, the future, or anything else, what would you want to know?
Do you know what stuck out to me about that question was the word truth? Because just not to deflect, I will kind of answer it directly, but not to deflect. But that is the crux of it. Like that, when you're talking about counseling, when you're talking about coaching, when you're talking about anything where you have somebody who is acting as that outsider, they are able to see a picture of your reality that you might not be able to. And so if I had a crystal ball, essentially like a super coach, I guess,
Yeah.
it would be able to tell me the truth about my life, not my perception of the truth. And I think that would be really powerful. I think it would be quite freeing, because even in those, we all have this when we look back on our childhood or like other parts of our life, and we kind of think, oh, I was terribly wronged there or something. But actually, the truth might be very different. It was just my perception of that in that
Yes.
moment. So I think it would be really great to like look backwards and in the present to kind of say, this is your reality. This is your actual true reality of what's going on. And then in terms of the crystal ball of the future, I mean, gosh, that is, I don't know whether I want to
I know.
know.
I know. It's tricky.
Because what if it shows me something
I
terrible?
know.
And then I can't do anything about it. And so I worry about that. I worry about it actually an unnecessary amount, which is this feeling that I'm going to do something terrible and I have no control over it, and I'm going to end up in prison, and my whole life is going to be over. Like it's a reoccurring fear. But if I was talking more high level, it would be like, I want to know about my family. I want to know about my children, obviously. Like, if I could imagine what they're going to be like as young men and young women, I mean, I think they're going to be great. I'm just going to say that. I think they're going to be really, really great people, who I'm going to be endlessly proud of.
Yeah.
But I just like a little sneak peek,
Just a little one. Yeah.
to see. And then the other, on a selfish level, and maybe from a kind of our organization point of view, I'd love to know what, like, or more broadly, what the legacy of coaching is, or the impact of coaching is in education, if I could propel forward 50 years and say, yeah, that was actually a lever for change. Like, we're all talking about how coaching needs to reform in lots of different ways, and there's no argument about the fact that it's not perfect. But I'd love to know whether coaching plays a role in that change, not necessarily by me, like by everybody who might be engaged in coaching. So that's from a kind of selfish point of view, I suppose.
I think those are all great. Yeah. Um, I, it's interesting, isn't it? I think the idea of truth is something that probably most leaders would value kind of knowing, because I guess, leadership by definition, is about decision making. And I guess the higher up you are in an organization, the more, impactful and kind of, serious the decisions are you're going to make. And then I was thinking about, of course, crystal balls don't exist. However, your point about kind of our perception is not reality
Mm,
probably pushes leaders, and should push leaders, to reach out to other people to provide the truth, or at least a different perspective prior to making those decisions, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it's just about kind of gathering data, etc. But there are lots of different ways that you can do that. I mean, yes, coaching is great for that. And you mentioned counselling, if that was an intervention that felt appropriate, not necessarily in a leadership place, but just for people. I also speak about mentoring, you having somebody who is your mentor. And I don't know if I mentioned this to you when we first met, but and I've actually only had, if I'm going to be really honest with myself, I've only had 2 sessions, but I have a mentor and he is 25. And this isn't about, mentorship isn't always about that person being older.
Right.
It's about them having experience of something that you don't. And
Yes.
he has experience of being a 25-year-old in 2025. And I don't have that experience and I never will. And I want to know what it looks like from that point of view. So mentorship, or like getting that picture of reality from as many data points as you can without it feeling overwhelming and confusing, can help you to just say, or even have someone to challenge it and say, is that true? Like, let's test it. Like, your point of view, you're steadfastly believing this is the right decision. Let's test it out before you kind of launch it.
I love that. Another key takeaway there about, mentors.
Yeah.
Mentorship is not about age, it's about experience.
Yeah.
That's great, isn't it?
I like to call it a keys takeaway. No, I'm joking. I
That's
literally
what I
just think,
genuinely was thinking that in my head. Hey, quick, and I just couldn't make the match in my head quick enough. But yeah, we'll do that afterwards. Yeah, well, that's great, isn't it? Yeah, that is really. And again, I think that's another useful challenge to people who are thinking about mentor and or setting up mentor relationships within their organizations. That if your default is to think someone older,
yeah.
probably not using the right sort of connection there. Okay, amazing. Wow, we're going on to your second ignition point. So another key moment, which again is this idea, which you said, the coaching course that you went on, which I suppose is an obvious link, but I guess we're interested in why was it so pivotal?
And actually, it might link to a question that we have later on around crying.
Crying.
So the coaching course that I took, I kind of stumbled across coaching. It wasn't really something that I was like, that's definitely what I'm going to do. It was just part of a job that I was doing already, as a consultancy job that I was doing, and coaching kind of naturally fit into it. And then somebody else said to me, it sounds like what you're doing is coaching. If you're interested in learning more about that, I know a really great course. That was it. And I was like, okay. And I don't know how deep to go with this. Basically, it was during COVID, and you're going to catch me on a very emotional day. I haven't even said anything yet, and I already feel like crying. Okay, we'll go with it. We'll go with it.
Just to warn you, I'm a Mexican crier, so if you cry, I'll end up crying. So just
Will
go.
you? Okay. Well, I think I've shared this one other time in a public forum, I think. So it feels like I can kind of go with it. So it was during COVID. I had left my in-school role and I'd kind of decided to try my hand at being a consultant in schools. And I was loving it, really enjoying it, actually being quite successful, building up a lot of work. And then COVID happened. And COVID came like really at the wrong time for somebody who was trying to build a business. And so it was really a very challenging time. Financially, like put bluntly, a very challenging time financially. Apart from, I still had this one job that I just spoke about, that I was doing some work that felt like coaching. And then when this other person said, you could do this coaching qualification, I looked into it and I was like, okay, it's really expensive. It really, really was expensive. And at that time, I had been working as hard as I could, literally at anything that I could do, because I knew that finances were really tough. And I'd got to a place where, oh, Chris, here we go. I got to a place. I have got tissue here because I've got a terrible cold. So I'm just getting it ready. gonna get it ready. I'd got to a place where I felt like I was just doing a terrible job of supporting my family. Like
Yeah, it's tricky, man, isn't
it? I wasn't doing the job I was supposed to do, which was provide for them. And so during the time where I was doing, sorry, here we go. During the time when I was doing all of these jobs, I essentially stockpiled money
Okay.
um, because I
In
wanted them
cash under the mattress, was it? Just shoving mattress under cash under the mattress.
I'd started a savings account,
Right.
which I hadn't spoken to my husband about. And I'd like siphoned off the stuff that I knew that we needed to pay the mortgage and all of that. And
Yeah.
everything else I'd put into a savings account because I wanted them to have something when I wasn't going to be there.
Right.
I had already decided I had not served the purpose I should have done,
Wow.
basically. And I was like, I'm going to get to a certain milestone and I'm going to hand it over to them and when I'm not here anymore. Yeah. And then I had that money in that savings account. This lady said, why don't you try this coaching course? And it wasn't all of the money in the account, but it was a substantial amount.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, this is the last roll of the dice.
Yeah.
I'm going to give it a go. And I did it. And I've told the people that ran the course, you saved my life.
Yeah.
You saved my life. And not only that, like, started a whole new chapter of my life where I added value to other people. I felt good about what I was doing. I had this whole new lease of life and I was a useful human being again. And so it's such an important, that course was so important. Like, I learned how to be a coach. I learned all of that kind of stuff. And gosh, coaching is just transformational for me and hopefully for people that I work with. And I knew it as soon as I did it. I was like, this has to be in schools. But on a very personal level, that saved my life, quite literally saved my life. So big transformational moment.
Well, and I think you probably are giving too much credit to the course because you saved your own life, didn't you?
Well, yes, exactly. But it was, I always use this word serendipity. I always feel like there's this element of you meet people for a reason, or, that lady saying that thing at that time, like that put me on a course. And I have since spoken to her and said, that was so important. Thank you so much. And of course, been terribly effusive to the coaching company and and the course providers. But it genuinely was a very well run course. But yeah, it was a really pivotal moment.
It sounds like it was, and I think we come back to this. It seems it's a regular theme on the podcast. This idea that, and we will substitute the lady on the course, the lady who spoke to you, as just a leader. But I think we forget sometimes how powerful, some of the things we say to the people that we lead, or that our peers, or even our superiors, can be in their lives. And that should, I think for us, for people that are listening to this that have worked in education, that's a fairly standard thing. We understand that we are changing kids' lives, and potentially we can all think back to a teacher that we had who said something to us that stuck with us or believed in us and all those sorts of things. And I don't think that stops when you become a leader, because you're just doing it for different people, but we also shouldn't underestimate that.
Absolutely not.
And I'm also I'm constantly, I don't know if it's a mixture of surprised and frustrated about sometimes how simple leadership is, or at least the management of people are. Because when you speak to people and you talk to them about, tell me a story about a great leader that you worked for, they very rarely say anything overly complicated. They'll say things like, they knew my kids' names, they remembered my birthday, or they used to send me a little email to say thank you. And I did. And you think, God, it's just those little nudges that seems to make the difference.
Yeah, agreed. And languages, back to your
Mm.
thing about control, language is something that we can train and learn and be in control of. So even if you think, oh, I'm terrible at that, like I don't know how to communicate myself, I absolutely can practice it, learn it, get better at it.
All right. Well, let's keep pushing on. We're going to go on to your second launch pad, which again,
Well, okay, the second launch pad. I was wondering whether it was
you're
the other
thinking, do I
question.
get a break from crying now? Yeah. But also hilariously, I was thinking, for the last question, when did
Yeah,
you last cry in front of someone? Well,
there we
2
go.
minutes ago.
I mean, no, I have got another story about it, but
Yeah.
I will. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, this one is, I think, links really closely, and I think is again something fascinating to me. And I tripped over this this idea of a kind of behavior equation, but when I thought about it, I was thinking more of a kind of PD lens, because as my role is across professional development across the trust of 35 schools. I was thinking about this idea that for lots of people who provide professional development, they don't think past the provision. This idea that they don't think about how the learning is going to transfer into the environment, or they don't approach professional development. And we're getting better at this, I think, now, from a behavioral point of view. They think of it through the lens of, if I increase knowledge, people will get better. And it's probably not as simplistic as that. And so I tripped over this kind of behavior equation, which is kind of Kurt Lewin's work, which we'll put up in a minute. But he suggested a while back, and again, apologies to anyone who knows much more about this, but this idea that our behavior is a function of us as a people, but also our environment. And yeah, I mean, he said this way, way, way back, that, if you're trying to change your own behavior or trying to change someone else's behavior, then we need to think about it in that duality around it's them and their environment. And so if we unpick that a little bit, there's this idea that, if we were thinking about improving ourselves or someone else, there are some personal things that we could work on. So self-efficacy in terms of their confidence, levels of motivation, and then I guess more broadly, their expertise in terms of knowledge, skills, and experience. So those could be things that we would lean into or kind of help them develop. But I think one thing that struck me more strongly is how limited leadership view is of the environment that people are going back into after they've done some training. Because you could be on the best coaching course in the world, but if you go back into an environment that's not supportive, then you're going to get limited transfer. And so this behavior equation starts to talk about kind of our physical surroundings and our social surroundings. And so if we unpick that a little bit, there's something around, does the training accurately represent the working environment? Is there a kind of authenticity about it? Certainly if the training involves any practice or rehearsal element, is it close enough to reality that it can be transferred? If people are reading on something around, really like fundamental stuff about, do they have the time and the equipment to do the thing that you've trained them on? And so this goes beyond education, and then this thing about kind of how much headspace or physical space, as in time, do people have to implement this stuff? I know I hear a lot from teachers and people that yeah, that's great, Chris, but I'm going back to planning and marking 500 books. I'd love to do this. It sounds amazing. However, and then this idea of social surroundings. So I didn't put that in there on purpose, continuous improvement, but your dad will be happy. But there's, are you going back to an environment where it's safe to say, I still don't get it, or I still need help, or, that sort of thing? And is there an expectation that you will use the training? I mean, a lot of the training of transfer of training, even literature, talks about this idea that, there should be an expectation within the culture that you implement what you've learned. And it's quite easy to have the opposite culture, where people can go on courses and there's no expectation that then happens. So that's interesting. And then, of course, the feedback thing, going back from a course and implementing it is only the start of that journey. You need somebody to sit beside you, metaphorically, I suppose, and keep checking and keep, that kind of deliberate practice cycle of, do, review, reflect, all that sort of stuff. And then, of course, it's great if we can share things. But anyway, why did that resonate with you when you saw that one?
Well, actually, interestingly, on lots of levels, but just as you were talking through there, which was really useful for me to hear it out loud as well, there's parallels between this and the previous launchpad that you showed, which is if you're expecting an action, the impact, whatever, if you're only looking at the action and result element, they went on training, therefore, you're not going far enough. So this speaks to what's the context, what's the values of the organization, what are the beliefs of the organization, how does it support that? So there's actually a parallel between those two. You could layer the two things on top almost. The other reason I was kind of gravitated towards that is because when you were speaking with that section about the person, that's such a core part of that. Essentially, what you've written out there is self-determination theory, which is such a core part of what we do as part of our coaching practice, which is to understand what is essentially like the unmet need of that person, or what is the challenge for that person. And typically it will fall into them talking about, well, you listed a few things there, but they kind of fall under three categories: relatedness to others, so their relationships with other people; autonomy, which comes under, the kind of agency, choices, decision making; and then mastery, which is around competency and confidence, and motivation might come into that also. So that I kind of gravitated towards that because that was like, that's the bit when we're working in coaching, we really are working in those areas. And then separately from that, and I mentioned some of my time working kind of as a consultant, I worked with an organization that just looked at learning environments for the learners. And they were a company, they were like a furniture design company, basically. Prior to me working with them and then pushing that into a place where they were more of a consultant, thought leadership around learning environments. And I was fascinated by the impact that the physical environment could have on the attainment and achievement for students. But of course, we have other human beings in that building, and those people are the adults and the teachers. And so I also incorporate a lot of this when I talk about coaching. So if you're just taking that training strand, if I'm talking about coaching and I'm thinking about it, I love that question about, does the training actually match the reality of what they're going to go back into? And that's something for me to reflect on as the external provider of that training, but also to kind of address with them, like, so now that you're going to take this back in, is your environment fit for purpose here? Like, and I mean that in a very physical, practical way. Like, does the head of science never see the head of art because they're in buildings that are completely separate? So they're never going to have a collaborative conversation because they just don't see each other, or their timetables never match up that they're going to be free at the same time. So there's a practical element there. There's also like a practical element around, do the spaces provide an opportunity to have a neutral conversation, which coaching should be, a non-hierarchical conversation? And if not, can you create spaces that allow that to happen? So what I mean in the kind of negative way is, if you have to have a conversation with me, Chris, and I'm your deputy head, and you're going to have to come to my office, that is not a neutral space. And so therefore, how can we make sure that it is? One way is by giving you choice and saying, where would you like this coaching session to happen?
Nice.
So it can happen in your classroom if you want, or we can go for a walk, or we can have it in the dining hall, or whatever. It doesn't matter. When do you want it to happen? Might it be after school? Might it be before? Might it be when you have your free period? Do you want to have it online? Yes, we might work physically together, but actually this creates enough detachment for you to feel open with me. So just thinking about that the environment absolutely affects the efficacy of the learning that's happened outside, but to transpose it onto that previous launchpad. And if it doesn't, how far back do you need to work to make sure that the context is right for what's going on here? So yeah, I love that.
Oh man, that's so good, isn't it? And all kinds of things firing off in my head now about potentially you can't get to triple loop learning without psychological safety or the environment that supports that
Potentially,
safety.
yes. Oh gosh, that's a knotty little issue to
It
get
is,
into,
isn't it?
which
Yeah.
is like chicken and egg.
Well, yeah, and a couple of things. So the first one that struck in my mind for leaders as a call to action or a challenge is to think about the physical and social environments that you work in or that even you've created and whether
Yeah.
they support transfer. But
Mm.
also, yeah, that idea of how much choice are you providing with people, to people in those potentially tricky conversations, or if you
Mm.
want people to go deeper, you have to create an environment where they feel safe enough to go deeper.
Yeah.
God, yeah, that is fascinating.
We've
We're
got
gonna have
him
to do version 2 of this podcast, I think. Yeah,
with my dad.
get your dad on your shoulder. Yeah, I think if I do meet your dad, I'm gonna be a bit scared. But anyway, Eric, let's so.
Same as me. Same as me.
Well, sadly, we're close to the end now. We've got one last fast friends question, which again will get us to know you a little bit better. But so tell us a bit about kind of the last time you did cry. Then, well, a time that you've cried in the past in
Have
front
fun.
of someone.
Well, okay. Listen, I've just cried, and as I said, like you said, oh, I'm a crier too,
Oh, I love it.
and you love it. I love it.
Yeah,
Absolutely love it. And there's still a bit of a, maybe stigma is too strong a word, but like I'm apologizing while I'm crying, right?
sure.
Like,
Yeah,
and I feel embarrassed about that expression of emotion. But I wouldn't apologize for laughing or,
no,
that it's just an expression of me feeling something in that moment. The last time I cried was yesterday, and it was because, as I said to you, I cried twice yesterday. But I'm generally not a crier. But anyway, and I know that you've been reading the Stoics, so I
I
am
have.
trying to be more stoic in my outlook. But I cried yesterday because I had a counselling session, and you mentioned about you having counselling, and I bring this to light for two reasons, and I'm not necessarily going to talk about what I spoke in my counselling session about, but it did elicit an emotional response for me. And the reason that's important is because that's when little breakthroughs happen. Like that's when you kind of let the wall down and you've just kind of gone deep enough. And it's not to say that you can't go deep without crying. Obviously, you can. But it hits on something in a different way. And I've been reflecting on that counseling session all of yesterday and all of today, thinking, do you know, first of all, I feel much better for having spoken about it, released a bit of emotion, but also it's given me time for reflection as well. So, and the other reason I want to talk about it is, and I'm so glad you brought up counselling, I'm on kind of a life's mission to make sure that people don't feel a stigma around reaching out to people when they feel they need help. And I've shared very vulnerably there a period in my life where I absolutely needed a critical intervention, and counselling was that. So alongside that coaching course being the thing that saved my life, there were many other things, and counselling, being able to speak to a counsellor in that moment, was also a critical intervention. So I would but I look at coaching really counselling really differently now, and I express this when I talk to people about coaching and counselling and the differences. So I always feel like it's taking my vitamins. Like
Right.
I am doing this from a proactive point of view rather
Yes.
than a reactive point of view.
Yeah.
I'm making a session with her because I can feel things bubbling, and I know that if they go unchecked, then this will become a bigger issue, like potentially a really big issue. And I don't want to go back there. So I'm going to make sure, ironically, after my laryngitis bouts, I want to stay healthy. So I'm going to try and do that kind of pre-work to make sure that I can. And some of that involves feeling emotional about
Yeah.
stuff and
Yeah. Yeah.
getting into the weeds of it. So yeah, that's the last time.
And I was just thinking again, a keys takeaway, as we're now going to call them.
I'm now going to call
Um, that idea of thresholds is interesting to me. That you have to reach there are different thresholds of reflection in terms of depth, and you have to
it.
reach certain levels to get sustainable change or something like that. But one thing that struck me as you were talking then was potentially for leaders and coaches, looking out for the presence of emotion as a signal that you've reached or broken a threshold, and almost not shying away from that. I mean, for experienced coaches like ourselves,
Yeah.
I lean in when people get emotional, because I think, oh, hang on, we're onto something here. But it wouldn't surprise me if some leaders lean back.
Yeah.
Kind of like, oh, this is awkward. Well, it's not something to shy away from. You've done something there that has allowed that person to reach a threshold of reflection, which potentially could unlock all kinds of other stuff.
Yeah. And
Interesting.
I've taken quite a lot of, there are overlapping techniques within coaching and counseling, and I'm not a counselor, I'm not a therapist, and I wouldn't use those interventions, but there are things and language, back to language, that I would use. I'm much more comfortable with the silence than I used to be, and holding that kind of, that person is having some processing time here. Whether it's emotional or not, I'm going to let them do that. I'm not going to jump in with my questioning. I'm going to allow them to just explore that. And if there is an emotional response, they might be apologetic, and but I'm not going to catch them there. I'm going to say, that seems like it's elicited an emotional response for you. Why does it feel emotional? Tell me more about why that feels emotional for you. And then we're getting into it, more and more and more. So yeah, I love those processes. Not that I love people crying or
No.
but I love, as you said, those kind of thresholds of breakthroughs that happen.
That sounds great. Wow. We're at the end, but of course, I know. Tell us a bit about how can people connect with you on socials or with the educational coach? How can they get involved in the stuff you're doing?
Yeah, please. I would love them to. I'm addicted to social media, so any other reasons to connect with more people is only going to feed that addiction, unfortunately. You can find me on LinkedIn. You type in Julie Keys or The Educational Coach, which is our company page, where you'll find more about what we're doing generally. And then you can follow me on Instagram as well, at The Educational Coach. It's much more casual over there, I will say. And then, of course, our website, which is theeducationalcoach.co.uk.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for all the listeners. If you're interested in also the Launchpad stuff, then connect with me on the socials or grab the book. And there's going to be a website soon, which would be exciting. So thanks to Julie, and we'll see you all at the next one. Thanks very much.
Thank you.